Thank you for having me. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak to everybody today. Um, it's interesting to present to an industry group relating to highly regulated industry because I came from investment banking. I spent a good 20 years as an economist and securities analyst in financial services. And while there, I studied different elements of identity management, including biometrics and cryptography and smart cards and things like that. And so this is kind of near and dear to my heart, and I appreciate the opportunity to present some thoughts for you. So what are we going to learn today? Well, first of all, we're going to talk about the PKI fallacy in a nutshell. There's a problem out there in user authentication and verification where we're conflating a couple terms and a couple processes. And device authentication is not the same thing as user authentication. And we'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about why identity theft, hacking, and money laundering are really about identity verification and authentication. There's methods that hackers and fraudsters and criminals use that specifically relate to identity management in order to propagate their crimes. I'm going to point out that sometimes your ID verification vendor may not be doing exactly what you think they're doing. Many of these companies are for profit and they're trying to sell something. We'll talk a little bit about more about that. There is a solution to this problem, and that is biometric face matching and liveness detection throughout the know your customer and anti-money laundering processes. And then I'll give you a snapshot of where identity management is going and how ID verification and user verification and authentication will evolve. So device authentication is not user authentication. Sometimes we conflate these terms and these ideas. So I like to take a step back and kind of go through some basics of this stuff. First of all, a privilege. To me, a privilege is something that a person is allowed to do that others are not. It's something that is an extra special qualification that they're allowed to engage in, whether that is, they might pay for a privilege to access a service, or they may be granted a privilege by virtue of being an employee at a company. There's other privileges like driving a car on public roads, for example. A credential is something that represents that privilege. It binds that privilege to an individual, right? And according to the Cambridge Dictionary, it's the ability or experience that makes someone suitable for a particular job or activity that other people are not able to do. But they go on to add a second definition, which says that a credential is a piece of information that is sent from one computer to another to check that a user is who they claim to be. And if you think about the logic of that, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because in reality, data flowing between devices has nothing to do with the person that's holding the device. And that is the key to this argument. In fact, we use certain technologies to authenticate devices, and we use certain technologies to authenticate people in a remote digital environment. And the technology we use to authenticate devices is called cryptography. And the system is known as a public key infrastructure. Again, according to Wikipedia, its sole purpose is to facilitate the secure movement of data between two devices, okay? Again, it doesn't have anything to do with people, really. So can cryptography and PKI actually authenticate people? Well, the reality is that it doesn't, okay? Cryptography can only authenticate devices, and it does that extremely well. I love cryptography and I love PKI as long as it's being used properly. But in fact, authenticating the device has nothing to do with authenticating the device's user. So the PKI fallacy is a term that I coined some time ago that seemed to be well received out in the industry. It's a false logic progression that suggests that when a public key infrastructure certificate or a cryptographic token or something else is used to authenticate a device, and that device is in fact authenticated, that somehow we know something about the user of that device. It's presumed that if we know the device, we know the holder of the device. And that is simply not true. But that is the way industry approaches user authentication today. In fact, there are standards out there that rely on device authentication in lieu of user authentication. And so that discrepancy, that conflation of these two processes has created a major vulnerability that hackers and fraudsters exploit today. And it shows up in data breach reports and the nature of the crime industry here. What we find is that data breaches, and this is part of a report that is written and produced by Verizon Enterprise Services every year. It's the Verizon Enterprise Services Security Report. It turns out that 85% of all data breaches have to do with a human being, okay, and 61% involve weak user credentials. Importantly, almost very few, a very small fraction of data breaches and frauds relate to device authentication failures. It's not the cryptography that isn't working, okay? It's the user authentication that isn't working. And this is where the vulnerability is, and it's where we need to focus. And it shows up in some of the biggest data breaches that we hear about in the news. You've probably heard about SolarWinds. It's kind of a big deal. And, when people talk about SolarWinds, they say, yeah, a Russian hacker broke into a company's network and uploaded a Trojan malware software package into an upgrade software deliverable that the company was going to send out to all of its customers. And they say, well, once he got in there, he did all this horrible stuff. And they think, yeah, it's really horrible and bad. And, those dirty, rotten Russian hackers. Well, the thing is that they don't really talk about how the hacker got in there in the first place. Okay. The breach is not what he did after he got in. The breach is, how did he get in? Right. And it turns out, according to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, that it was a password theft. Somehow the hacker managed to get the passwords of an employee of this company, okay? Whether it was some type of a phishing attack where he downloaded or he clicked on a link labeled eBay or something, or maybe it was pornography or something, but the hacker got his password somehow and was able to log on to this company's network, okay, as if he was the employee. And what he was able to do, and this is where the device authentication comes in, and the fallacy, is that he was able to register his own computer on the company's network as if it was the employee's computer, okay? And what happened is the network, in an automated way, apparently the network allowed up to 5 different devices per user. So the network didn't know that it wasn't the employee. And so the network didn't know that it wasn't the employee's computer. And the network passed a SAML token, which is a cryptographic token, to the computer. And that credential allowed the computer to log on to the network seamlessly and easily and in an automated fashion from that point on. And the user authentication system was so weak that the Russian hacker was able to get into the network anytime he wanted for 9 months. And while he was in there, he deployed his malware software package. So what the hacker did is just exploit strong device authentication that was supported by truly weak user authentication. And in fact, it was multi-factor. Just because it's multi-factor doesn't mean that it's strong, okay? Well, a lot of companies in highly regulated industry, they outsource this. They hire other companies to do their user authentication, their user verification, their background checks, and then the enrollment and the authentication of that employee or whoever, customer, from that point on. And the sad part of this is that There's a million of these companies out there. There's hundreds more coming online every day because it's really easy to do. There's no intellectual property that really protects processes in an identity management system and in an enrollment system. Anybody that wants to can set up a business of doing this. Whether or not they are selling security is questionable. And in many of these cases, we find that the IDV, the identity verification provider, really is selling more compliance than they are security, right? It's an opportunity for a company to check the box and say, yes, we did everything we needed to do to make sure that this was actually Jay that's enrolling in the system. And in fact, they don't do much at all. And this isn't us saying this. This is, these are studies out in the field. There's a company called HackerNoon that ran some tests on some various IDV vendors, and they found that, quote, to our surprise, some service providers simply verified the fake documents as if it was a legitimate document and declared them as original. They're talking about driver's licenses, of course. We see today that you can, flash your driver's license, take a picture of your driver's license and beam it over to the IDV vendor. And the IDV vendor presumably does something with that, verifies the authenticity of the driver's license or whatever. Sometimes they don't. They just simply file the picture along with the identity profile and say that's good enough, right? They don't even check to see to ensure that the document is real. And the fact is that this happens all the time. How long have people been using fake IDs to do things like buy liquor on Friday nights? Teenagers have been doing it for forever, right? Well, the fact is that fraudsters are doing this every day today. And you might be surprised how often this happens, okay? All a fraudster needs is to get the data related to a real human identity in order to pass a synthetic identity check. Okay, in China, they are manufacturing fake IDs that have the same holographic images, that have the same barcodes. You can read them and it looks like it's a real ID. If you don't think this is true, you can go on and look for yourself. This stuff is available for sale at a moment's notice. Whether it is a passport or a driver's license, it is available on the dark web, and it is simply custom ordered. You order this and then they ship it to you. And this happens a lot. This was dated in the mid-year of 2020, but nothing has really slowed down. The Department of Homeland Security in the United States intercepted a package of 19,000 fraudulent ID cards. They were coming from China, I believe, and so if this was in 1 month, if I remember correctly. Now, just imagine how many of these they don't catch, right? These fake IDs are realistic and they are pervasive. They are everywhere. And if your IDV vendor isn't doing much to verify the integrity of that card, you may be enrolling a fraudster in your system. So how do we stop this? Okay, how do we stop electronic know your customer fraud? How do we properly verify somebody? Well, the key to it really is a liveness proven face biometric match to the picture on the credential. That is the first place you should start. If your IDV vendor isn't doing that at least, then at that point, and it could be anybody's picture on that driver's license. It doesn't matter. So you at least have to make sure that you have a living human being standing in front of the camera and that person's face matches the face on the driver's license, okay, to a high degree of satisfaction. Now, this mugshot here happens to be our CEO, and I like to use him, but he gets a laugh out of it. But this is the first step of verifying an identity online. So what makes a liveness proven face match truly strong? Okay. Well, first of all, you have to verify the integrity of the biometric sensor, the camera on the phone. You also have to verify the integrity of the data flows from that camera. Now, this is cybersecurity, right? This is where cryptography and PKI comes in. You can use cryptography to secure the data from the sensor to some storage tank or a processor somewhere on the phone. And you can use software to ensure that that data flow has not been corrupted, okay? One of the biggest spoofing attempts out there, in fact, it's the vector of choice for some of the largest identity spoof schemes out there, is to hold up a very high resolution picture of an individual in front of the camera, or even break into the phone and inject an image of a face in lieu of what the camera thinks it's actually seeing. And that's what the cryptography actually guarantees against. So you have to make sure that the phone hasn't been tampered with, right? Secondly, you have to capture as much data as possible. The more biometric data that you capture, the higher the potential match confidence can be in the outcome, right? The problem is that most of these systems that are out there only capture a little bit of data. The match confidence is actually quite low, and they don't even do liveness checking, right? So in a best case scenario, what you want to do is bind the liveness data to the face biometric data. You want it wound together, okay? And that creates a lot of opportunities to distinguish a fraud from a legitimate person as the process moves forward. The key is that it has to be collected concurrently, right? And it also needs to be encrypted once it's captured and then sent on to the data repository for comparison. When you do that, you verify the user's identity, okay, not just by taking a snapshot of the document, by actually pinging a database that says that this is a real identity, verifying that this is a real document, right? Verifying that it's a live person standing in front of the camera. And then once you're satisfied that that identity has been sufficiently verified, then you want to bind that biometric, that liveness proven biometric, you want to bind it to the identity profile, whether that is an employee profile in human resources or a driver's license profile at the Department of Motor Vehicles or whatever. You want to bind the biometric to that identity profile, and then you want to authenticate the person using the same type of biometric to the stored value that's bound to the identity. So you have verified the identity, you have locked a known biometric, a real live biometric, presumed to be that person, proven to be that person, to the profile, and then you can authenticate to that with high assurance. 99% of the time, that's not what companies do. And so there are problems out there. Now we're talking about moving biometric data from the device. A lot of people say, well, that's taboo, that's really bad, that's really dangerous. Well, it's not, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, okay? But it does require a little bit of computational horsepower. The more data you capture, the more processing power you need to do those types of calculations in a fixed amount of time. And user experience is important. So you want to be able to do this as quickly as possible. At Facetec, we can do this in about 2 seconds, right? But once it's behind the company's firewall, once it's been decrypted behind the company's firewall, you check for liveness. Is this a real person? And if it's not alive, you just stop the process right there. If it is alive, if that person is found to be alive, then you delete the liveness data. And what's left is pure biometric matching data, okay, which can be bound to the profile, right? The key here is that the biometric matching data, lacking the proper liveness data, cannot be resubmitted. It cannot be sent back into the system and in some type of a theft, right? Even if somebody can get into the database and they got that data, they could not resubmit it because it's lacking the required information. It would be rejected and the transaction would be canceled, right? And I want to talk about anonymous biometrics. We have this idea out there that, I have an Apple smartphone and it uses 3-dimensional biometrics, just like we do at Facetec. captured a little differently, but very strong biometric processing capability. The problem is that the biometric data on the phone is not bound to an identity anywhere. There's nothing on your phone that says that that biometric actually came from you. Okay, and I doubt that many of the IDV vendors out there even understand this, right? So what that means is that if I somehow got your phone, I could register my biometric on your phone, presumably if I stole your password or your PIN or whatever it is, I could register my biometric on your phone. And then from that point on, your phone would not know that I am not you, okay? Importantly, what that means is that the relying party, the third party, the app or the service provider or whoever it is, they also can't know it isn't you. They will automatically assume that I am you. It's called anonymous biometrics, and it is a real strong vulnerability out there. It's a problem, folks, that needs to be fixed. By binding the biometric data to a user profile, whether it's on the phone or in a database, it doesn't matter. You actually are locking a known biometric to a known proven identity. And from that point on, the authentication is no longer anonymous. It is very, very strong, and you can count on it. So you authenticate the device user, the claimant, to the verified identity with liveness proven biometric data. In a moment, we're going to talk about the future of this and where that data is going to reside. Now, again, biometrics are kind of, people worry about it. You know, I mean, there's a lot of strange discussion out there. Everybody seems to like biometrics, but they don't like it when it's used because it's scary. You know, we think our privacy is being violated. People think that you can't move biometric data and you can't store it in a central database because that can be scary. And I'm here to tell you that there's a bunch of nonsense. Okay, there's this stuff called cryptography, right? We've already discussed it. It's well-known and very effective technology to secure data in transit or in rest, okay? Now, if cryptography works on other kinds of data, like bank account data or driver's license data or whatever kind of data it is, then it will work on biometric data, right? The problem here is when a company doesn't use the technology properly, when they don't take the proper safeguards, okay? So let's just agree that we can do it securely. In fact, the biggest biometric database in the world is in Clarksburg, West Virginia. It's the FBI's forensic investigation database. It has over 1 billion biometric templates in it, okay? It's never been hacked. It's the biggest honeypot. They call it a honeypot. If a guy can get in there and steal all the data, it's a honeypot, right? It's the biggest honeypot in the world, folks, and it's never been breached, okay? If the FBI can encrypt their data and secure the biometric data, so can we. We just have to make the choice to actually do it, okay? The truth is, we can move it securely, we can store it securely, and we can use it safely and securely. And here's an example of what we do on a very rudimentary basis. We have a device SDK that guarantees the integrity of the data, captures the information, the liveness and the biometric data wound together, encrypts it 6 ways from Sunday, sends it to the server. The server, when it's behind the firewall, it's decrypted, and that then is bound to an identity profile and then can be matched against it later, okay? This is usually how our customers do it, and some ID vendors actually use us in their platform. But that's not where this is all going to go. I like to say you are who your government says you are, okay? You know, when you're born, the government issues a birth certificate, and in the United States, they issue a social security number. Maybe in Canada, they do the same thing, but in other countries, they have national IDs that they give to citizens, right? When you die, there's a death certificate. That's also a government document. We use government credentials, like driver's licenses are issued from the government. In the United States, that's a de facto national ID card, right? healthcare ID. There's all kinds of ID related documents, credentials that are issued by government. No, you are who the government says you are. In fact, if you want to change your name, you have to apply to government in order to do that. That's just a fact, right? So why don't we use the government identity profile that already exists as the source of verification assurance for people that are applying for various privileges? We could very easily move a biometric to a government profile behind the government's firewall. And from that point on, we can authenticate to that profile. Now, the key is you use an API system, okay? You use a system where let's say that you're applying for some kind of a service at a bank. You want to open up an account at a bank through your phone or whatever, right? The bank app has the SDK in it. It captures the biometric and liveness data, encrypts it 6 ways from Sunday, sends it to the company server, right? Once it's behind the company's firewall, it's decrypted. It's scanned for liveness. If it's deemed to be alive, then the match is made potentially to this, right? Or to a stored value that's already in the database, right? Now, the data stays behind the government firewall. The biometric data that is attached to the government profile stays behind the firewall, and all you have to do is match to it. So let's say that you're authenticating to that bank app now, right? And you submit a driver's license or something like that, an employee number, an account number. The account number goes to the private company server. It pings the government database. It sends the CHUID or the identity number, which is anonymous, and the encrypted face scan, and the government compares it, and it simply returns a yes or a no. Does it match or does it not? And if it does match, we know that it is the person who has been verified to exist, and it is the right identity, right? And our privacy is not violated because no PII moves around. No biometric data leaves the government, and the government is collecting this already. If your face is on file for a driver's license, they already have your face. So this is just using the existing infrastructure. It looks like I'm down to about 2 minutes, and I've pretty well completed my presentation.